Alright, this is lesson 4.3, still in stretching and shrinking. This is where we start to learn how to apply this to real life in the form of finding the missing part of shapes. So we're going to learn how to find the missing parts of a shape. We're going to set up and solve proportions using the cross, multiply, and divide strategy. Now, cross, multiply, and divide is going to come in pretty much every single lesson for like the next 20 in a row. It's a very useful strategy, very easy strategy. The hard part is learning how to set it up, so how to set up a proportion. So that's what we're also going to look at how to do today. So, simple. Let's start with how the cross, multiply, and divide strategy works. It's exactly like it sounds. First, you find the two numbers that are across from each other. So x and 4, those aren't numbers. 3 and 8 are. I'm going to do 8 times 3, which is 24. And divide. Well, I've used 8 and 3. The only number I have left is 4. 24 divided by 4 equals 6. X equals 6. That's all there is to it. I can check my work by plugging this back into there. So I have 3 over 4 equals 6 over 8. Well, I can simplify this by dividing by 2. I get 3 over 4. So 3 over 4 equals 3 over 4. Okay, pretty simple. Moving over here, cross multiply, find the two numbers you can cross. 15 times 3 equals 45. Divide by 5. 45 divided by 5 equals 9. X equals 9. Once again, you can check your work. 5 over 3 equals 15 over 9. I can also look at this instead of simplifying like I did over here. Well, 5 times 3 is 15. 3 times 3 is 9. Lots of ways you can check your work. Most important part, can you cross, multiply, and divide? Alright. Let's apply this to some shapes where it actually makes sense. So, use the cross, multiply, and divide strategy to find the missing parts of the shapes below. So anytime you have a pair of shapes and a missing part, you can use the cross, multiply, and divide strategy. However, setting it up is the hard part. We're going to focus a lot on how to set it up. Now, a proportion is a fraction equals another fraction. Now, I can't just throw in a bunch of random numbers and have it work correctly. I've got to go all the way back to earlier lessons to remember what corresponding means. I have to match things up correspondingly. So first, I'm going to start with the x. The x, if I look a little bit at this other triangle, matches up with the 5. So, I'm going to put the x on top, and I'm going to put its corresponding side on top on the other side. Now, what goes on bottom is up to me. If I want, I can do the small side, which I will. Whoops, I don't want green. I want to change it up. The small side matches up with that small side. So, I put the 3 here and the 1.5 here. This shape produced a fraction, and this shape produced a fraction. I put the green on top and the yellow on bottom. Please be careful that you set up your corresponding sides correctly. Now all I have to do is cross, multiply, and divide. 3 times 5 is 15. Divide by 1.5. When you divide by a decimal, one trick is to move it over and add a 0. So now I'm going to do 150 divided by 15. Well, 15 goes into 15 once. No remainder. Put the 0 up. My answer is 10. So now I need to go back and somewhere in my problem say x equals 10 centimeters. Don't forget the unit it came with. And now you have your answer. Now you have the missing part of that shape. Alright, let's try number 2. I'm going to have a fraction and another fraction to set up. I'm going to do some colors again. So let me take a look. X matches up with 5.5. And all these numbers are pretty nasty, so I'm going to pick the shortest side, match up with that shortest side. Now, I'm going to put green on top, 5.5 and x, and the yellow on bottom, 3.3 and 8.25. Now I'm going to cross multiply and divide. Now, these are some pretty nasty numbers. I'm going to use a calculator, but before I use the calculator, I'm going to write down exactly what I'm going to put into it. So first up is 8.25 times 5.5. So, 8.25 times 5.5 is 45.375. I'm going to divide that by 3.3. So 45.375 divided by 3.3 equals 15.125. So, don't forget to do what you did up here. Mark and label your answer. X equals 15.125. And I'm not quite done yet because I don't have the centimeters there. And once I put centimeters, then the answer is correct. Alright, let's try this out on rectangles, which are actually a lot easier than triangles. But we started out with the hard, now we're going to the easy. So, let me go ahead and find my corresponding. The x is the longest side of the rectangle, matches up with the longest side on the other, so it matches up with the 10. 1.5 matches up with 6. Go ahead and set up my fractions. Green on top is x over 1.5. And then green on top on the other side, 10 over 6. Cross multiply and then divide. These aren't that bad a number, so I'm going to go ahead and do the math. 1.5 times 10. Anytime you multiply by 10, you just move the decimal over, so I get 15. 15 divided by 6. 6 goes into 15 twice. I get 12, remainder 3, bring down a 0. 6 goes into 35 times, which is 30. No remainder. My answer is 2.5. X equals 2.5 centimeters. Let's go ahead and apply this to a couple other harder shapes. Use the cross, multiply, and divide to find the missing part. Now, this shape is pretty much the same thing as a rectangle. Just looks different. The x is the longest side, matches up with the longest side over there, which means the shortest sides match up. And I can go ahead and make my proportion. So x over 27.5 equals 18.75 over 12.5. I'm going to cross multiply and divide. I'm going to use my calculator again, but I'm going to write exactly what goes into the calculator. So first up is going to be 27.5 times 18.75. 27.5 times 18.75 equals 515.625. So now I have 515.625 divided by 12.5 divided by 12.5 equals 41.25. Last step, x equals 41.25 meters. Alright, still not too hard. One slightly harder shape and then we're done with this lesson. Use the cross, multiply, and divide to find the missing parts, both x and y. Now, we have a couple other numbers that we need to include here. So I'm going to go ahead and start matching up the x and the y. So the x is this little side, matches up with that little side. The y is this big side, matches up with that side. Now, I cannot have an x and a y in the same proportion. So I've got to find a number that matches up with another number. So I'm just going to pick 8 and 14. Now, I'm going to set up and solve two different proportions. One of them for x, one of them for y. So I'm going to go and start with the x. So I'm going to pick green over yellow equals green over yellow. 1.75 over 14. Notice how I set it up. I do not have the y over here. I'm going to set the other one up, and then I'm going to solve them both at the same time. I'm going to pick blue over yellow, which is y over 14, equals blue over yellow, 4 over 8. Once again, I don't have the x and the y in the same proportion. Now, I'm going to go ahead and cross multiply and divide. I've got a nasty decimal, so I'm going to use a calculator on that first one. 8 times 1.75. So 8 times 1.75 equals 14. 14 divided by 14, well, anything divided by itself is 1. So x equals 1. There are no units in this one, so I don't have to worry about writing a unit. Next up, 14 times 4. I can do this one without a calculator. 14 times 4. 16, carry the 1. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 1 is 5. 56. Now I have 56 divided by 8 is 7, with no remainder, which means y equals 7. So x equals 1 and y equals 7. Alright, let's go back to the worksheet, make sure we answered everything. Lesson 4.3 was all about this new idea of finding the missing part of a shape. Want you to know how to find the missing part of a shape, so we were going to set up and solve proportions using the cross multiply and divide strategy. Our example is about cross multiply and divide, just as simple as it sounds. Applying it to these three shapes, learning how to set up the proportion as well. Applying it to this parallelogram set, and then applying it to this random shape set. Now, this completes lesson 4.3 in stretching and shrinking. Up next is lesson 5.1 of stretching and shrinking, and the last segment of stretching and shrinking is actually my most fun and usually the most fun of the classes.